that the cleansing with the water, like when you go out of the house, or even people ask us when they come to our retreats that morning meditation, can we come without taking a bath? So that is not really considered very kosher, because washing your body with water is kind of a ritual, and it signifies really taking care of it and cleansing it. So that is, there are certain things like that which is what we call bahya shaucham.
I think it also has to do in our culture with the fact that 99% of people will go to the loo in the morning. I mean, I know with my sister's family that's a big thing.
Yeah.
You go to potty in the morning kind of thing. So after that you must be clean.
Exactly.
You have to clean your body.
Yes.
Done the big job. Probably has to do with sex in the night also. I don't know. But,
yeah.
Because in the night is all these activities happen. You eat,
True.
you get up in the morning, you go
True.
to the loo, and then you have to have a bath, and then only you can go to the mandir.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is, that you go and do potty and all, and after that you have to clean it. You can't just keep it like that.
My sister's family, they're so religious that even if they go potty in the daytime, then
they go and take bath.
They will not go to the mandir with that. I said, what do you do when you get diarrhea? And all? I said, it's so crazy. But so that's I think that is also part of the subjects. All agree.
And
but it's also practical, because you need to, there was disease spread and everything through not cleaning. So I can get the reason for it.
And what is beautiful is, during this bath taking, they take water and they do prokshanam. Prokshanam is like really spiritually cleaning yourself, and they say Achyutaya Namaha, Anantaya Namaha, Govindaya Namaha. Okay, so you actually tell yourself, Achyutaya means you remind yourself that Atma, the real I, is Achyuta, means it is not touched by any dirt. The real I, which is awareness, is not subject to any dirt at all. You remind yourself, Achyutaya Namaha, and that Atma is Ananta. Ananta means without any end. Right? So this, every day I remind myself through this little 3-word ritual that my true nature is never getting dirty. It is something which is limitless. Anantaya Namaha, Govindaya Namaha. But the Atma that I know is so small and insignificant, so you need Govinda, means through Vedas you can know this Atma which is limitless, and it is not subject to ever being dirtied. So this is something which is done, and it's a simple, it's just 3 words, and every time you just take little water and you sprinkle on yourself. But it does something which is amazing to your self-esteem, because every day you're reminding yourself that you're limitless through a very simple ritual. Okay, so that these are some of the small little additions in our life which make little bit of change over a period of time. Okay, now the external cleanliness is something which is important, but the second important thing is the internal cleanliness. Okay, so now here we know that you can put water, you can put soap, you can put whatever, and you can clean. But with reference to your mind, how do you keep it clean? I can always keep on telling you keep it clean, but how? Right? So what do you think? How does one keep one's mind clean?
Keep it free from clean of grudges, resentments.
Excellent. Absolutely. Keep it free from resentments, right? Keep it free from one of the things which is, that a mind which is not distracted. This modern times, there is one of the biggest problem is the distraction. Okay, so every time I go and I see that the people ask you questions, but they just don't have patience to listen to the answer. By the time you finish one sentence, their attention has wavered. They are looking somewhere else, they are thinking about something else. if that is the case, you actually can't have an exchange with anyone. Okay? So we have all these social gatherings and everybody is making so much effort in terms of dressing and looking nice and looking beautiful, but nobody actually makes an effort to get to know each other and to have some meaningful conversation. And this is why, in spite of so much socializing, we feel what? Isolated, and then you feel the void. Otherwise, if you have so many people in your life, you should feel so nurtured, you should feel so nourished, because you have this whole big network, right? A network of people who are with you, who are, thinking about your goodwill, or you enjoy goodwill with them. So, but all of that happens, but without that soul inside. Okay, so that is one of the reasons. It's not that people are bad or anything, but nobody pays attention to really getting to it. Becomes a show rather than relating. Okay, and one of the problems is that people are distracted, and they don't even mean to be mean or anything, but there is a distraction. Now, the society that we have created, I don't know, you're a pediatric, okay, so I no, in that Rishikesh retreat, Meera, you met, right? She's a doctor, and she's a neonatologist. Okay, so what happened is, one of the other participants who had come from the US from my Thailand retreat, she says to her that, I have little grandson, and while eating, they give him educational videos. They said, he doesn't watch all these cartoons, but we show him. And she says that this is the worst thing that you can do, because a child is so young and the child's brain is not moving so fast, right? So the child has to be taught, while you're eating, you're just eating, and you're not doing two things at the same time at a very young age. So then what happens, the child's brain is not able to process information like the adults, and then already there is this two different activities going on at the same time, and it's unable to handle it. The second thing she said is that when you watch movie, the frames are moving fast, right? So therefore, for an adult, it's okay. Your mind can process these moving frames, but for a child, the mind has not yet developed enough to be able to see this moving frames and capture the meaning of that. So that means you are adding so much confusion. First of all, eating gets mixed up with watching, and within watching, it's not just one thing that they are watching, they are going on watching different things. And by the time the child does all of this, she says, if you make the child watch TV before, I think she said 5 or 7 and all, you're actually making the child, exactly.
There's a lot of research now which says that we are seeing a much higher incidence of ADHD. Of course, some of it is because it's now being diagnosed better.
Yes.
That is but I see now almost every other dear child who has some sort of psychological issue or the other. Almost every ordinary child I'm seeing in my clinic has some issue or the other.
It's incredible.
Stubbornness, this, that, everything, all of it.
Too much it's to handle. There's too much
There's
pressure.
too
Yeah.
much. There's too much pressure.
It's too much.
There's too much choices.
Too many.
Too many choices they have. And this constant watching, they cannot. No single child I know today can be without a device for even more than half an hour. Either they have a phone, or they have an iPad, or they have a Game Boy, or they have TV, or they have PS, or they have computers. There has to be, just yesterday I had a kid, he's not even 2 yet. And his father says, unless he plays for half an hour on my laptop, he won't go to sleep. Yesterday the father had a meeting and he went off somewhere. So for 4 hours, and took the laptop and went. So for 4 hours, this child cried continuously because he was sleepy, but he couldn't induce himself to sleep because the laptop wasn't on. So the mother called the father back from office saying, "Then you have to bring the laptop back for your meeting." This child has to go to sleep, I'm exhausted.
Addiction of me at 2 years old.
And there's also this thing in adults where a lot of people say, I can multitask. So you start feeling like you're a weirdo if you can't multitask and you can't have music playing and read and send an email and give instructions to the main. And But you can't do it. At the function, if there's loud music.
I can't drive with that musical blast.
Yeah. You can't.
What is your ears to hear what you're seeing on the road?
But it is it because your brain processes it, and the
So
brain.
they're downloading a song, they're listening to a song, they're downloading an episode and checking their emails. I can't have more than one window open.
Exactly.
So that's why the children can't sit and read anymore. Because they need things that are flickering and moving and they're pressing. They can't. If you give them an article with 3 pages, by the first paragraph he's looking, what are you looking
So
at?
when you have to give the SAT and you have to do that critical reading, it's very hard because you have to focus on what that whole paragraph says.
Yeah.
So when my daughter was very angry, my older one, she opened her laptop. So one day I just tiptoed to see. She was just doing this, and the cursor was moving. I mean, skip 50 times and don't go to the gym and pay less over there and work your anger off instead of ruining this cursor, you know. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm very angry and de-stressed. Actually, we were skipping much on this skip.
No, another mother who bought this sponge, you know, there's one toy there, like a big inflatable thing with a sandbag in there, and it has a big me thing on its nose.
And then you just punch.
And she's bought this for a 1.5-year-old girl, saying that she has so much anger that her box is
Why is it 1.5?
I don't know. I don't know where to send these kids, what to do with them.
Oh my God, it's really very, yeah. This, you know, that so much dysfunctionality at such a young age is just appalling. Yeah, it's just amazing. Yeah, then too.
But she may used to punching and shoulders. She thinks punching is okay. She probably could have punching anyone. You don't know.
I don't know what to say to these parents.
Very tough for your doctors also in today's times, really.
Yesterday, those two parents are looking like the most frazzled things on earth.
And in fact, it's interesting because Avni once made the comment, I don't know, I remember very well, and it's a very true thing, you know. So, like before every class, I just keep quiet for 2 minutes. And she told me that when you're watching a video, and it is so true, because it's true, she says, you know, that everything else. No, it is so true, but actually it stuck me because it's a fact, it's a fact. She says, you know, everything that you switch on, immediately everybody is talking and it's like, you know, and she says if they switch on your video and they see nothing happening, you're just sitting like this for 2 minutes, they think exactly, they say they'll just kind of switch it off and they'll just watch something else which is like starting, like, you know.
You think it's wrong if you keep punching.
Yeah, exactly. So it is and it's true. This is and she really captured how people think, and it's so accurate. It's so true. Then for a while I was trying not to do it because then I said, yeah, I have to. But actually I feel that I need to be centered before I talk. So, you know, I said, okay, now if they don't have that much patience, then it's, you know.
That's our culture. We have these speedy weddings now. You pay the priest more so you can rush through the ceremony itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Jaldi karo is like, yeah, absolutely. So that inner leisure and, you know, that distraction is something which is really, I mean, and it's something that you don't see. So you don't see it as an abnormality, but actually when you begin to interact, you begin to see how people are, you know.
Roald Dahl, one of the authors, I think it was Roald Dahl, who had written that he had time to stare at the sky, and that's how he became an author. Kids of today are running from class to class, so they don't have time to just spend time with their own thoughts and create new things because they're just running without thinking like dummies from one class to another, so they don't get that free time and space to think.
But you know, if you give it to them, they don't know what to do.
But that's because
Absolutely.
we put them into that pattern from age 2. We were sending for tennis, for squash. See these little things coming for tennis and squash. Your wrist is not, they should say your wrist is not formed yet or not strong enough to play it. But to get to that national level, you're sending your children. I was shocked when I used to see these little, I mean, I started my late and I was, oh my God, I'm so late. My 10-year-old or my 9-year-old is starting when these little 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds are playing. It's in anything. It's just that everything is, you know, we're putting them into all this.
Yeah, exactly. And then we want them to do so well in everything and at a very young age, giving all these inputs. And So therefore, now how does one deal with? In fact, this Dalai Lama has done some amazing research, because Western societies are, having these problems, and they are very aware of these things. So he has done like some empirical research with all these, professors at Harvard, professors at Yale, professors at Princeton, and in this time and space, what he does is he enters and he shows them empirically how meditation helps. Okay, because now you find yourself in a society like this, and what can you do? You can't change the society, but if you begin to, for yourself or for little kids or whatever, little bit of meditation, half an hour of staying with oneself, and they show neurologically how much it changes. Their attention improves, their focus improves, their capacity to think improves, and empirically. So therefore, it's not just that we are making claims. When all these professors say, then it gets what? It gets a certain, exactly. So, absolutely. So therefore,
I have to share my son Vishal, who's 20. The other day said, Mama, can I sign you up for this meditation course? I'm paying 90 rupees for the month, so I can't know how much he's paying, and it's fabulous. And he was sitting and trying to meditate from his computer. He said, "Just tell me how to meditate." And he did a 2 minutes meditation. I don't see him doing it again, but he did it. It was quite amazing. So these young kids are feeling, like you're saying, the stress, and on his own he's saying, and he signed up for meditation.
so I have this kids class where I told the kids, because if I tell them, okay, sit and meditate and all, they are all going to laugh at me, they are all going to giggle and stuff like that. So I told them a story of Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs is then this and hero and this, and then their all eyes are like all opening, and So I said, this Steve Jobs was when Apple was going public. Public means the share. Then I asked them, I said, what does going public, a company going public, what does it mean? So they don't know. Then I explained to them what is, so I said, then all the prospective shareholders were all there, and they were going to buy the shares of Apple and all. And it was going to then, he was going to become like a multimillionaire, right? When the minute your company goes public, then you've made your life. So I said, when that event was happening, they were looking for Steve Jobs, and he was not to be found anywhere. So finally they found him in a room, and this is a true story, right? Meditating in a room with himself, and he was meditating. So I said, why do you think he was meditating? Right? When there's such a big event happening, and he should be so busy preparing for it, and he was just sitting with himself and being quiet. So I asked them, why? Why should you think? So he says, because he wanted to be peaceful and he wanted to be quiet, right? So then I said, but what is the value of being peaceful and being quiet? So they said, because if you're nervous, then they said you can't perform well. They figure it out, right? The thing is that if you keep on telling them, meditate, 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 they will laugh at you. But if you engage them in a conversation and you ask them questions, it is amazing, they know most of the answers. So you make them discover the value rather than imposing certain disciplines. They are so smart. They are all these cathedral kids, 8, 9 years old, and they all figured it out. So I said, now, how do you feel from 8 to 12? And they knew it. They are so savvy. It's incredible. We only see this side of it, but there is another side of them which is brilliant. They know so many things which we didn't know at all. So how to bring that part out is the challenge, because we only think about, they are distracted, they are like this, they are like that, but actually there is this whole big potential which is already there, and we should know how to unravel it, right? So therefore I told them, when you have to give a presentation in front of your, how many kids are in your class? So they said there are about 36, 38 kids. I said, how do you feel when you have to give a presentation? They said, oh, we feel nervous, we feel, we feel, oh, what if I say something and my friends laugh at me? Or one person says, oh, I get panic attacks. So therefore I said, now what do you do? With that frame of mind, if you go and you present, how would you do? They said, no, not at all well. Right? They know it. So I said, now imagine if you sat in the meditation for 2 minutes and quietened yourself and centered yourself and then you talk, how would you feel? They said, yeah, then we would do well. At the end of the class, that's all I said. I didn't say anything, right, that you should do this or you should not. At the end of the class, they are all asking me, so how many times should we meditate?
How can we meditate?
How can we meditate? Because they see the value for themselves. If you don't create the value and you just give them command, they are not good. They are going to be very rebellious. But if they see the value, they want to do well. Nobody wants to be nervous. Nobody wants to have that lack of confidence. Nobody wants to have a panic attack. So I said, have you ever talked about all these feelings that you have to anyone earlier? They said, no. I said, why haven't you ever talked, this is how you feel and you haven't talked about it? So then they said, because when we come home, the only thing our parents want to know is, did I come first? Did you, yeah, exactly. Did you come first in that how did you do? So nobody wants to address how you felt, right? So therefore, and everybody is so kind of performance, like how she said, that if you want the child to be at the national level, you have to start early. So like there is all this huge pressure, and we operate from our pressure, and then when you see dysfunctionality, then what happens? You blame the child. So we put pressure, and when the child does not respond to that pressure, because the child is not supposed to respond to, then we further blame the child by saying, oh, he's not performing. And then we keep on seeing problem with kids, but actually we never look back and we see how are we responsible for creating this whole. We bought into a given scenario and we put them through that, and that is not a healthy scenario for the child. So there will be some distortion, and when that distortion comes, we further blame the child. Okay? So therefore, this inner shaucham, young age, even as adults, most of the time when we teach meditation, most of the adults says, I can't just keep quiet for even 10 minutes.
10 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. So that means we are so not used to just being with ourselves, just for 2 minutes or 10 minutes. When that is the frame of mind, then even as you said, you are with a book and you're constantly going to think, now now I have to send my driver here, and then I have to do this, and then now I have a tea with this. So that means your mind is so crowded with hundreds of different thoughts, you are unable to sit with one thing and do it properly. Okay, and I saw that, and most of us are like that. Okay, so when I saw that after this 3.5-year course, when every morning we used to do meditation and all that, I went back to my work and I saw how much easier it was for me to finish my assignments than before, but also with reference to everybody else. Because everybody else, they are all brilliant people. They have all graduated from all great schools and everything, but their minds are all distracted. Too many things going on. With that mind, you just can't concentrate and do one given thing properly. Okay, so therefore, this meditation helps a lot. And unlike every other meditation, Vedanta, this is inner shaucham. Okay, Vedanta has meditation which works at multiple levels. Okay, the first thing it does is it just helps you to physically relax yourself. So that's the first step, right? Watching your whole body and paying attention. If something is aching, just pay attention and relax it. That itself is going to just, physically also we hold a lot of tension, and letting that go. The second thing is watching breathing. Okay, now how does watching breathing help? there is a big association with what the mind and your breathing. So if you go, even in the US, they say a de-stressing class, the first thing they teach you is to breathe. Because here, if all these things, what automatically happens is your heartbeat is going to be all irregular. So the minute you start to breathe, then automatically your mind begins to slow down. Okay. Now the third discipline is to discover some kind of a distance between the thought processes and yourself. So one of the techniques when you go to Vipassana and all of that, all those, some of the meditations, they just ask you to, what do they ask you to do? They just ask you to watch your thoughts, right? What is the value of that? Why should you watch your thoughts? One thing is, the whole thought life that you have, your whole identity, who you are, is with reference to the thought life that you have. So that means there is no cognitive distance between you, who's observing the thoughts, and thoughts which are coming and going, right? You become as good as your thoughts. By this practice, what are you doing? You are seeing,
watching, and you can change that.
Exactly. One thing is that the minute I say that I watch my thoughts, I'm creating what? Exactly. I'm creating a space. Actually, there is no because in fact they are never attached.
Not detaching, but you're sort of looking at it like a third person.
Exactly. So that means one thing, one has to be very careful what one is doing, because otherwise what happens is that when two things are different and we take it as one, we make a mistake, right? When actually they are separate. One is the awareness, because of which you see all the coming and going of thoughts. Okay. Now what is a mistake we make? It's a mistake that for us, our whole identity is defined in terms of those moving thoughts. So if the moving thought is that of happiness, I said, I am happy. Okay. And if the moving thought is that of sadness, I say, I am sad. The third, the moving thought is that of jealousy, I say, I am jealous. Okay. So therefore, for us, there is no cognitive distance between the observer and the observed. But actually, in reality, there is a distinction. How is there a distinction? If the happiness was I, it will stick to you as your attribute forever. But the very fact that that happiness goes and you remain, what does it mean? That you are the observer of that given thought which comes and goes. So in one day, you can have many different feelings. You can wake up very happy, and then afternoon something happens and it upsets you. Evening again somebody does something nice for you, so again you are like all cheerful. So that means in one day so many different emotions can happen, right? So now you get defined by every emotion that is what? Fleeting. But if you begin to recognize that all these emotions are fleeting and I am the observer who begins to what? Observe, then what? There is a cognitive space. When you have that cognitive, I am already free. What is the need for that space? It's very important to recognize that. So our teacher used to tell us that imagine you're an actor and you're acting in a theater, right? And you're playing the role of a beggar. So how do you have to act?
Feel sad.
That you have to feel sad, you have to show that you're, exactly. So you have to really play that role, and when you do it really well, what happens? Other people, you evoke emotions in other people who are watching you. They identify with you, they identify with your miseries, and they actually, then what, you get a lot of claps at the end of the show. Okay. Now imagine, while all that is happening, the actor who's playing the role of a beggar, how does that person feel? Feels happy. What is he doing? He has to play that role. So he's playing that role, but there is an inner leisure. There is an inner leisure because the person knows the beggar cannot be without an actor, but actor is what? Already. Does the actor have to detach oneself from being the beggar? No. Because what? It is already free. Exactly. Right? The minute you want to detach, you will not do your job well. The beggar, there is a role. You have to play that role. The minute you start putting into this whole thing about detachment and all, what are you creating? You are creating artificial life. But if you understand that actually what is the relationship between the actor and the role, then you are free. While playing the role very well, you are free. Because you understand something more than what?
It's obvious.
Exactly. So therefore, while doing everything, what you don't interfere with that, but you understand that I am already free. The actor, while playing this role extremely well, enjoys inner leisure because of the knowledge of what relationship between the role and the character who is playing the role. The characteristics of role, do they belong to the actor or they just belong to the role? Only to the role, not to the actor. Actor is already free. Right? That is a freedom, that is a most profound freedom. Because imagine, while playing, if the actor forgets the distance between the actor and the beggar and starts believing I am the beggar.
Ego becomes schizophrenic.
Exactly. Becomes schizophrenic. Because the person has lost perspective. And this is exactly with reference to changing mind and I. We have lost what? A real, a fact. We have mixed up. Something which is incidental, we have taken it to be the intrinsic attribute of I. Okay? The minute you start loading your I with all these different things, then what because there is no role, imagine, right? That there is no role in this world. Even if you are playing a role of a hero, there are challenges or not. The beggar has one's own challenges. Imagine in a movie you see a hero who's never had any challenge at all. Has grown up, right, with the best of the best family, got married to really good wife who was very good, very intelligent, very artistic, knew how to cook very well, and they both had kids who were like brilliant, and everything went just exactly as one hoped for. My teacher used to say, nobody will watch that movie.
Yeah, I honestly.
No, because what?
Because it's not true.
Exactly. It is no fun. The heroes means what? The hero also has exactly. You have to absolutely. You need to overcome challenges, right? Challenges themselves just as every character in the drama has one's own challenges. There is no character in the drama who doesn't have to, then that person is little redundant, supporting role. Even through that person, challenges have to arise in somebody else's life. Each one has a plot. There is no redundant human being in this drama. So therefore, but while playing every role, right, if you are not able to have the cognitive distance between the role and the person who is playing that role, then that creates confusion. In real life drama, this is exactly the problem. Okay, there is this whole thought life, and every role that we play, every role that you play, whether it is a role of a parent and child, or a spouse, or mother or father, or a colleague, or whatever, every role has a challenge. There is no role without a challenge. Now imagine if you don't have cognitive distance between the role and the you who's playing that role, and every challenge which belongs to different roles, it's all what is just loaded. Your I, your sense of I, is loaded with not just the challenge with one role, but every other role. Then it becomes what? It becomes too difficult, and everything is jumbled up. And while jumbling everything up, you again then what? Make your own stories. You feel persecuted, you feel this, you feel that, and so not only you have to go through the real challenges which belong to, your role playing, but you keep on adding to those challenges by adding your own messages. So that means, imagine what our mind becomes by having that lack of distance, which is a reality. Right? It's not that we see, please understand, in Vedanta we don't give advice. We don't say you should be, we just make you see how things are all jumbled up. The minute you begin to understand what are the problems, hopefully you'll be able to sort it all out. Because if you don't understand the nature of the problems, then what will happen is that you'll keep on multiplying the problems without even understanding how to undo it. Okay? So inner shaucham means that you begin to sort out. That vipassana, I don't know whether they explain or not. I have no idea. They may just, I don't know what they do. But it plays a very, very important role in just sorting out what is my intrinsic nature and what belongs to the role and where are the difficulties. And if I have inner leisure, then I can look at those challenges very differently than when I'm totally caught into that, and I've bought that this whole thing as belonging to me, and then I've built up, and then my capacity to deal with it also becomes.
I think one of the most important things Vipassana does is tells you that the fact that you could get away from everything for 10 days and sit there, and that you are able to do it and the world hasn't collapsed around you. I think that really does that.
Absolutely.
It doesn't do anything else.
Yeah.
That the world hasn't collapsed without you.
And everything
Yeah.
goes on.
Everything goes on.
Life
Yeah.
goes on.
It's just
And-
a small
Yeah.
link, and even if we move out, it continues.
It
And come back,
continues.
it comes back.
It
also.
absorbs you also.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important message Vipassana gives you, and it tells you that I can keep my mouth shut for 10 days. That I think for me will be a big lesson. I think big lesson.
Yeah. But one thing is very important, that's true, that even though the world can function without you, you are a participant in this world. You have roles to play, right? But to play the roles with that lucidity as to what is my nature, for me, this is the most important thing, right? The answer is not that because the world runs without you, you are redundant.
Yeah, and that you shouldn't.
And that you shouldn't do anything, because that is not a right message.
And it doesn't excuse you from not performing your.
Absolutely, right? So that means that you have come to this world and you are put in a given situation. You can't just say, oh, that will run without me, so therefore I'm absolved of all the responsibilities. You have to do it, and in fact you have to do it so well, right? At the same time have that inner leisure. That inner leisure is not an advice, it is a fact that we miss out. It's different. So I don't know whether they explain, but this is really the crux of the whole thing, right? Otherwise you don't quite know why you're just watching. A lot of people come to us and said, I don't know, why should I just watch the thoughts? Because they are not explained properly what is the value of that. What are you doing in the process? Right? So therefore, that is one thing. The second thing is, when we do this mantra chanting, in traditional Vedanta we do mantra chanting. So in mantra chanting, what happens is, if I tell you, let's say chant one chant, let's say Om Namah Shivaya. So if I say chant Om Namah Shivaya, what will happen for next 10 minutes? You think you'll be able to chant for 10 minutes Om Namah Shivaya? Om Namah Shivaya? No. what will happen? The mind will be starts wandering. So when the mind starts wandering, it gives you what? A certain understanding about the relationship you have with the mind, which is you want the mind to do something only for 10 minutes out of this 24 hours, and it doesn't do what you want it to do for even 10 minutes. Okay, so that means there is a total lack of mastery with reference to our own thinking. We want it to do one thing and it ends up doing something totally different. Okay, so this is why you keep telling the kids to sit with the book. Maybe they sit with the book, but will you be able to control where their mind goes? No. They'll spend 2 hours looking at it but thinking about something totally different, right? So therefore, this capacity to, what meditation does is, when the mind does not chant Om Namah Shivaya, what do? You bring it back to the chant. So this way, you keep on, yeah, exactly. Every time, because you create, this is what I want to do for next 10 minutes. And then whenever the mind goes off, you bring it back. Goes off, you bring it back. Goes off, you bring it back. When that happens, over a period of time, those 10 minutes will become easier. And then, it's not just at the time of meditation, then when you are reading medical journal, or when you are, it'll what? It'll learn to focus. Okay? That discipline of bringing the mind back over a period of time, this is what we call, the neuroscientists now they call it neuroplasticity. The minute you begin to operate differently, the physical wiring of the brain changes.
It's an exercise.
It's an exercise. The shaucham. Inner shaucham doesn't mean that because you don't have any detergent to clean your mind. But these are all the practices to really have the mind mind is an amazing tool. And you need to use it very well. But it becomes a monster when you don't know. You are stuck with this amazing instrument and you don't know how to manage it. But it is an amazing instrument. That's why we are not like other spiritual, the mind is something that you have to kind of, get rid of. And this is beyond mind and all. No. Mind is something which is an instrument that you are given. It is an ingenious instrument. And you have to just learn how to use it. Because we haven't managed it well, all these dysfunctionalities have occurred. When you use your free will to master it, you can actually use it for amazing things. You can achieve so much in the very mind, right? So that shaucham is bringing back the focus. Then what the second thing is, every time, so in this case, the first chant is Om Namah Shivaya. What is the second chant? Om Namah Shivaya. What is the third chant? Om Namah Shivaya. So therefore, now, if any situation, any event occurs, okay, what do? One thing is, we tell ourselves, there is an internal messaging system. So an event occurs outside, you have to make sense of that event. So you told yourself some story about what has happened, right? Now what happens, most of our suffering comes where we don't only give that one sentence story. What happens? We build on that story. Coloring. That building up has so many different assumptions, so many different conclusions, all your past experiences, everything gets all jumbled up and you begin to create a story. And the biggest problem is every story where the facts get mixed up with your own conclusions and you don't have what you don't realize. Entire thing seems like fact to you. Okay? So therefore, and then that's what, as Bela says, is coloring. You color, but if you knew that you colored, there is no problem. But what happens, what you have colored seems like reality to you. So therefore, this whole build-up that we do, we need to what? Check that tendency to build up. People, when they tell me that, oh, they have been depressed for, let's say, 1 year, this is another new problem. Especially when we go to Europe, it's amazing that so many people suffer from depression. All these nice young working people, they suffer from depression. And so I make them realize one thing. I said, you feel that you are depressed for 1 year. Okay? But if in terms of thoughts, in one day, how many different thoughts you have? You have about almost 60,000 different. Is each thought that of depression? No. Right? Of these 60,000 thoughts, how many thoughts are pertaining to that depressed state where you are telling yourself you are no good, or you feel persecuted, or whatever? How many thoughts?
If you choose to become those.
Exactly. So that means all the other thoughts in your own cognitive understanding are what?
Useless to you.
They are useless to you. But you choose, let's say, out of those 60,000, maybe how many?
So 20.
Let's say 20. Those 20, let's say 1,000. Imagine those 1,000 thoughts you are aware of, right? And each one builds on the other. The next day, what do? Again ignore how many? 50,000 thoughts, and take those 10,000 thoughts, and those 10,000 thoughts don't just stay like that. They get built on, they get added on to those 10,000 thoughts. Right? And then you keep on every day build a story, and it becomes what? More and more and more gloomy and more intense. And you were caught in that. And that becomes the only reality. And as the 50,000 every day get totally ignored.
Then does that proportion actually then become that you have 50,000 depressed thoughts and 10,000 good thoughts?
So over a period of time, because then everything begins to the exactly. So that means you first need to recognize that all these emotions, the state of mind that you have, is a result of a lot of build-up over a period of time.
Nip it in the bud.
Absolutely. Generally what happens is that we ignore.
I don't even realize what's happening unless somebody points it
Absolutely.
out to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're not aware and mindful about your thoughts and what you choose to
Absolutely.
believe in, then I think that goes by.
Absolutely. So that's the thing. The first thing I tell them is, this is what has happened. Because you need to make them understand what has happened. Otherwise, what? That depression becomes a reality.
You have to look at the glass half full rather than empty.
Yeah. But the thing is that, that selective thinking is something that, what stays with us. And not only what stays with us, but what gets built onto what stays with us. That is the whole process. This is why then you feel that for 1 whole year you've been depressed. And it is intensifying as the time goes. Because as Bela says, even though it is 10, it may be first, let's say, only 500. Then it becomes 1,000. Then it becomes, then if you don't check that tendency, actually it could happen that 50,000 would become like that. So that is severely, you are severely depressed. And it's all because of build-up. And so that means an external stimuli is there, but a lot of it has to do with what? Your own build-up. So how do you check that tendency to build up? Build stories. That building story is something which is not intrinsically bad. Please understand. We build up on things, right? When you go to a physics class, in class 1, they give you some knowledge. In class 2, they build on that knowledge and they make it more. Then in the 3rd class, they build. So please don't call it as a negative thing. Right? It is every knowledge that we have acquired is what? A build-up. If you keep on forgetting the first thing, then nobody can build up. Building up per se is not a bad thing at all. If it is deliberate, it becomes a huge learning, right? All the doctors, how much you build up on the existing knowledge, right, to become a good doctor. Okay? But that very thing which is a gift can become turned against you.
It should be factual, not fictional.
Absolutely. It can make you a genius, and it can also make you somebody who's highly depressed. So
on the wrong path, if you just keep on and on convoluting.
Absolutely. So what I want to see in whole spirituality and in whole Vedanta, you have to become nuanced, because you have to distinguish where there is value and where there is no value. Because if you write off that build up thing totally, then you are also doing yourself a disservice, because it's required. But it becomes dysfunctional when that very thing, that capacity to build up, we use it against our own self-interest, then it becomes the cause for depression. So therefore, you need to learn to be deliberate with reference to that building up capacity. So how does that happen in meditation? Because when somebody said something to you, your first thought is, oh, this person was mean. The second thing is, oh, this person, then you create some story around it that has always been like that. What does the person not like about? So you keep on building the story. Now, in the chant, what is the first chant? Om Namah Shivaya. What is the second chant? Om Namah Shivaya. So that means it curbs your tendency to build. That is a huge thing. Right? So that means when you are very deliberate in where building is necessary in any learning, you use it, but that automatic storytelling, you are cutting that tendency. So by repeating the same chant again and again and again and again. So that means you are aware of what that you don't automatically start telling yourself many different things and work yourself into certain absolutely situation, right? Now certain feelings or certain orientation or a certain outlook of life. Now the third thing that meditation does, as I told you, that in between, so the chants, in between the chants, what is there? Space. That space is called silence. So that means there is a chant, there is a silence, then there is a chant, then there is a silence. Right? Now, so what is, unfortunately, some people say that silence is something which is you. If the silence is you, thought is considered to be what? When the thought comes,
Somebody else, external.
it is considered external. Okay. What you are told is thought becomes, if silence is you, thought is, when thought comes, there is no you. What we are telling in Vedanta is something different. When the thought comes, are you there or not to see the thought? You are very much there.
For that time.
Right? So that means you are there when the thought is there. When there is no thought, there is silence. Are you there or not? You are also there. Thought comes, you are there. Absence of thought, silence, you are there to observe the silence. Another thought emerges. Are you there or not? You are there. You are that invariable presence, Chit. Chit Swarupo Aham. Okay? You are that awareness because of which what? Thought is known and also silence is known. You are distinct from both. The silence doesn't disturb Chit, thought also doesn't disturb Chit. Experientially, you are given insight into that during meditation. Otherwise, when Vedanta talks about that Chit, Atma is Sat, Chit, Ananda, we are not at all used to what? Understanding or being in touch with that Chit ever. That's why it seems like abstract thinking. Because something which is there, we are totally not used to understanding it or seeing it. In that meditation, through this process, you're given that, that when Vedanta is talking about Chit, it's not talking about some abstract thing at all. It's something which is always present, but we miss it out.
It is so present.
It is so
that
present.
you don't notice it.
Exactly, Bela. It is so present that we don't notice it, and we load it with all kinds of things. We load it with so loaded, and then we suffer, and we don't know how to get out of it. So therefore, it is so present. So therefore, please don't think that when Vedanta is talking about Sat Chit Ananda, it is all about something which is so abstract. It's not. It's something which is so present that we miss it out. So it makes that whole teaching into something which is an immediate thing, immediate discovery. Okay? So that is what we say, that Chit Swarupoham. True reality. It's all reality based. Okay? All this is inner Shaucham, because these, once you get all reality figured out, your life becomes so easy. Okay? I want to tell you one thing which will help you in this whole thing, because in inner Shaucham. So therefore, this is the whole process of meditation. People ask, so how does Vedanta help in living our life? The starting point that we all have is this whole world, which is full of forms, we have taken it as reality. So in Vedanta, we have three different realities. One is what we call Paramarthika, Satyam. The other one is Mithya, and Mithya itself is divided into two. One is Vyavaharika and the other one is Pratibhasika. Okay, so I will explain what all three are. And what happens is, without Vedanta, the whole reality is mixed up. Okay, so therefore, imagine that there are lots and lots and lots of glasses. Like Avni has how many on the table? Right, lots. So now, when we look, how many we count? If I ask you, yeah, exactly. So let's say there are 10 glasses. So how, for us, what is the reality? The visible. So that means we give more reality to the forms than to the content. If you count the forms, there are 10 or 20 glasses. But if you count the content, which is in this case the glass, how many things are there? Huh?
Many more in one glass, not
I mean, sorry, I just want to, like let's say if I ask you how many wooden objects are there in this room,
There are many.
there are many. But if I ask how many, oh, they are all here.
Join our class.
Join our class.
Regular visitors.
I haven't realized how much noise there is last Saturday.
There is this table, there is that table, there is that chair, there is this. So if you look at the objects, there are too many. But if I ask you how many wood, how many?
One.
It's only one. Right? Because what is the relationship between table and the wood? The table cannot exist without wood, but the wood is independent of being the table. This is why I can dismantle it and I can make some totally different object. So that means, what is the relationship? Wood pervading the table, it what transcends, please understand, the form. Pervading it, it transcends. Because the form has shape, it has height, it has length, it has width. But that belongs to the form, it doesn't belong to the wood. Right? So that means in our whole transaction, so we miss that from this standpoint, what is the reality? There is one wood which is free from all the different forms. That is what we call Paramarthika. Paramarthika is the absolute reality. Imagine all these forms had only one underlying reality, and we miss that reality, which is that Chit, which is available to Bela, it's available to her, it's available to her, it's available to me, it's available to everyone. But it's so available that we miss it out, and we superimpose all kinds of things onto it. That one underlying reality which is free from all the attributes. That is what we call Paramarthika. Paramarthika we miss out without Vedanta. Okay? Now, this form which is Vyavaharika, which is dependent reality, because we miss out the one, what happens? This becomes absolute. So Vyavaharika, which is a dependent reality, becomes what? The absolute for us. Right? Now, when that becomes absolute for us, then we have a perception of these forms, what we like, what we don't like, and we again have a build-up. That build-up is, there is one thing that you have to understand, that mithya are of two types. If you don't understand, you don't understand Vedanta accurately. Okay? When I tell you that this table is dependent upon wood, the table has empirical reality or not? It has empirical reality. It's mithya, it does not mean that it's an illusion. Please understand. Or it's false, or it's not. It has an empirical reality, but it is mithya because it has a dependent existence on the wood. Okay. Now, if you are in the forest, right, and it's dark, and you see a long little object, brown color, this long, what would you think? You think it's a snake. If you think it is a snake, and if actually it is a rope, then that snake is mithya or is it satyam? Mithya. Why is it mithya? Because it has a dependent reality. It meets the definition of mithya, which it has a dependent reality. Because if there was no rope, you will not see the snake. The fact that there is rope and it has a certain exactly, there is some relationship, association, right? So therefore, it makes you make that mistake and makes you think that it is a snake. Now, that snake that you see in place of a rope, does it have an empirical existence? No. So that means it is mithya, but it is not mithya like table and wood. Please understand that. It is mithya, but it is pratibhasika.
Actual mithya.
It's actual, exact. So both are mithya, right?
Yeah.
One is vyavaharika, the other one is pratibhasika. Pratibhasika. Yeah. So that means one is empirically true and the second is empirically not true. It is your perception. So therefore, the way you define Vyavaharika mithya is, it is, therefore I see it. It is, therefore I see it. So that means whether it is me or Avni or Meher, everybody, each one of us will see the table. It is, therefore we see it. In Pratibhasika, I see it, therefore it is. I see the snake, therefore for me, it is a snake. Different. If Bela doesn't see this, Bela sees the rope, which is what is, then for Bela, that is exactly. Right? So that means now imagine in this world, the empirical, which is Vyavaharika, is without Vedanta, is taken as the absolute reality, the Paramarthika. And even the Pratibhasika Mithya is taken to be what? The absolute reality. So that means the feeling of persecution, which is maybe not an external reality but my feeling, that also is taken as the absolute reality. So that means when we live in the world, there is no lucidity at all between the three levels. Right? One is Paramarthika, the other one is Vyavaharika Mithya, and the third is Pratibhasika Mithya.
At the same time, you have to realize that this emotion is there. Of
Exactly.
being persecuted. You can't deny it.
Absolutely.
But
So that
you have
means
to understand it.
absolutely. So therefore, when you come to Vedanta, we are not trying to do anything but to give you lucidity as to there are three levels here, which are all mixed up into one. I first make you see, there is this absolute level which we constantly miss out, which is so present and we always miss it, which is already free. Sat Chit Ananda Atma. Which is never, it is limited, which is not limited, it is something which never gets affected, which is something which is really what your true nature is. That is what we are telling you. Okay? Now, that is something which is free, but how does it then, I have to deal with this empirical world. How do I deal with it? If I keep on bringing what? That one thing which is unchanging, can I use that knowledge to deal with the empirical world? No. You need different criteria to deal with empirical world, right? Because otherwise I can say, there is this unchanging reality, let me shoot somebody. That doesn't change. Can I use it? It is not, you can't use that fact to justify your actions at the Vyavaharika level. At the level of Vyavahara, what the forms have a certain reality like table. It's required in the house. You can't just put wood, flat wood, because every wood with that form has a given function, and that function is necessary. Just because it is mithya, you can't say that it is not needed. Everything is needed. But once you're lucid and you say, it has that empirical reality, and for that transactional world, I need every object. The forms are different. Now, what will govern my transaction with the empirical world is what? When I understand it's empirically true and I need every object, then what? My transaction with the empirical world is governed by understanding how this empirical world functions. This empirical world functions through what? Series of laws. Laws of gravity, nobody can ignore that. Okay, laws, so many different, the laws of anatomy, you can't transgress those. Any medicine that you want to learn, they operate within the laws. Laws of psychology, you can't bypass them. So that means when you are dealing with the empirical world, you can't keep on bringing that final reality and confuse the issue. You have to first understand the laws which govern the empirical world and align yourself to these laws. That is objectivity. Exactly. Even though you are free, but at the same time, you have to adhere. Exactly.
Avoid or accept.
Absolutely. So in addition to all these laws, we talk about what? Laws of dharma and karma also. Right? So that means that gives you an insight into in that Vyavaharika what becomes what the basis of your engagement. You need to understand how it operates and align yourself to it. Then it makes you see that in that there is another level which is Pratibhasika, where you have given meanings which don't actually exist.
And that's what Vedanta teaches you, how to
How
differentiate.
to exactly how to differentiate between, because empirical and pratibhasika is all mixed up.
Yeah, it's
It's mixed up. The minute you begin to say, okay, now this is really a fact and this is my addition, then slowly what do you begin to do?
So you start taking those and avoiding those.
Absolutely. Right? And you try to make yourself understand, hey, this is the minute
It's like
you
an
are.
obstacle race course. So also avoid the obstacles that are not.
Yeah. Right? So it gives you total lucidity about how to live life. 3 levels are all mixed up into one. This is a problem. So nobody can say without Vedanta the person is exactly the same. Nobody can say that. Because all 3 appear to be one. We start with a major distortion. Vedanta doesn't deny. Right? So it's 10:30, I will stop. Vedanta does not deny any of the reality. It's just asking you to see, detect which level this is and have an appropriate response. So it gives you total life of clarity. Life of total clarity. Our teacher used to say, the minute you begin to recognize your subjectivity as subjectivity and not the reality you're objective. Because then you can do something to change it. If you don't realize that it is subjective and if you think it is true, you have no incentive to do anything about it. That's all. Just gives you total clarity, and then your life becomes so much simpler and so much clearer. Okay? So this is effective. This is what we call inner shaucham. Inner shaucham means there is clarity. I operate from clarity.
It's a small word, but it has such a huge.
It's a huge thing. Right? So this is shaucham, and the last, the sthairyam and atma vinigraha we'll do next time. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.